Okay, here we go. Let's get set up. See if anybody shows up since this is a bit late. Okay, I have to go straight to my channel again. Start off by muting myself. Timeout. Okay. Usually I just straight up ban people, so edit video. Sorry guys, only permabans on this channel. Nothing else. Monetization on, even though it's gonna get cut the moment YouTube reads the description. Or not? Strange. Usually it instantaneously turns yellow. Oh. Yeah. Only one viewer. That's expectable. This is pretty late compared to when I would otherwise normally be doing things. Or three. Why is this always here? Right, so definitely at least wait until 10 minutes in. See if anybody shows up. Okay, well, now people are suddenly showing up. I'll pull the things up. Yeah, I'll at least get Google Earth up because I don't want to burn you guys' eyes looking at a white map in MS Paint for too long. But we will be using a paint map to color and uncolor various things, especially since I already had it in like a slideshow format, but I got the order wrong. But while we're waiting for everyone to potentially show up, Brazil is just had a buyout round. And so I was mentioning before that basically a huge portion of Brazil's oil production is all just coming from this offshore area right here. That a lot of the connecting area down here has not really been touched, only about 10% of it, right around, I think, here. And as it has, the similar topography, but the geology kind of changes as you go down this way. So it's not likely, and actually has already proven to not contain as much petroleum or other hydrocarbons as this section up here. It probably has like between half as much to 70% as much. But it's still a big area, and even half to 70% as much as has been up here, enough to bring Brazil close to 4 million barrels per day would still be a lot. Brazil just auctioned off basically this whole chunk down here, not off of Catarina. That stuff is still untouched, but the whole basically chunk of stuff off of Rio Grande do Sul has now been bought up by the oil industry, and exploration and development is going to get started there very soon. So especially if they do stuff off of Catarina as well, and they proceed with the stuff offshore of the mouth of the Amazon like they intend to, although there's not as much up there. Brazil, if things go as fast as they can and have been going, Brazil, while they'll still, over the course of this decade, get up to between 4.5 and 5, probably closer to 5, towards the end of the 2030s, or later 2030s, because eventually declines elsewhere will peak them. They will probably end up peaking like more around 6 million barrels per day. Okay, see who all is here? Four. Okay, still four. Uh, I do have it on live chat, right? Right. I hope everyone can actually hear me and no one's like blocked or anything. I'll be starting on the topic that the stream's titled in a few minutes. If you're still here while watching like the recording afterwards, I'm sorry I forgot to tell you you can skip until the 10-minute mark probably. But also while we're in the waiting period, We just had another massive sale of area off the Gulf of Mexico in the US, and predominantly this the lower portion of this sloping shelf was bought up, along with the lower portion of this area, and finally a bunch of stuff over here offshore of the east of Texas. And the particular reason for that, forgive me for some of these maps being a bit out of date, but the reason for that, why those particular areas were bought up, is because that's where, not a lot has been done yet. Whereas, like, everything to find up here and on the top parts of the shelf has been found. But down here, across here, and in the lower parts of the Mississippi Canyon here, only like 10% of that, because this map is from 2012, but as of now, it's a bit more dense. So about 10% of this has actually been explored. But now a huge chunk of it was just bought up in this offshore bidding round that we finally hosted after numerous EPA and environmental lawsuit delays. So the U.S. Gulf of Mexico will be pushing into its outer half. And from there, though, decade or two out, then the only portions left where there will be stuff is a bit further out here because this is still part of a slope. Whereas once you reach the end here, that's just it. It's just deep ocean where you won't find anything anymore. And then the Floridian Shelf, which is still banned for the time being. Do we have anybody yet? No. Oh, and we plateaued at 4. Or now we dropped down to 2. I was going to say we plateaued at 4, just like Iran's oil production, 4 million barrels per day. I have no idea what that is, so I'm going to delete that. And apparently, a second copy of that. Okay, current real. No, we want. I probably put it in here. Current zoom. Did I? It would be the regular current zoom. Current zoom. There it is. Okay. Okay, well, my mistake. No, we want. This is how professional I am. You don't see Photoshop. You don't even see Paint Tool side. You just see MS Paint. Because I am totally a professional in every sense of the word, in every possible way. Are we close enough? Almost close enough, and it's, like I said, later than I would normally do stuff. So I will probably actually start right at 10. So in like a minute. Audio bit. No, my bit rate is not 0. It's much higher than 0. If anybody's actually there, can you confirm that my bit rate is in fact not 0 and that you do actually hear me? In the meantime, uh, yeah, we'll get this up because I'm gonna want to look at those or use some of those. And one other thing we will need for this is probably in data caps. Ah, yes, there they are. The remaining reserves thing, or my hypothetical remaining reserves for everybody. Okay, somebody hears me, and it's about time. So, things have been not normal since 2020, but I had this odd feeling in 2019, and 2019 was like kind of a decent year for me, But I had this odd feeling back then. Now I kind of realize that was because that was the last year anything was remotely normal. That was the last year that I actually got to live in my home up in Fairbanks, Alaska, as 2020 to me. And I was not one of the people who got to recover job wise from 2020. So I've been, stuck in exile, living at my parents' house down in South Carolina ever since then. But after 2020 and 2021, we got into the even more interesting progressing years, and that is 2022. 2022 saw the well known, hopefully, Russian invasion of Ukraine, which we assumed, myself included, because that was one of the things actually, I'll add that to my list of like correct or incorrect calls. I'll add that to my list of things I was wrong about. Actually believing that Russia was a superpower. That is something that I was wrong about. I will admit that. So we expected something like the U.S. invasion of Iraq, and what we got was uh, drunken, poor logistical sit arounds and just wait for drones to strike you nonsense that then fell apart and saw Russia pull out of the north, and then saw them suffer line collapse in Kharkiv, go through attrition collapse in Kherson, and now in a desperate rush to try to claim the remainder of Donetsk Oblast before Putin's reelection in April or March. I think they moved it up to March, and they are attempting that by Russia's standard military tactic that they resort to when things get bad, which is just meat waves. Send as much human biomass as possible and basically just hope the enemy eventually runs out of ammunition, which has not been the case because Ukraine's getting fed from the outside. So the meat waves are resulting in piles of dead bodies, many of which I have seen and will never get to unsee, including, limbs laying everywhere and some people with like their spines hanging out of the upper half of their body. But that there were many reasons that were given. Uh, One of the ones, like preemptively before it started, was something about liberating the Luhansk and Donetsk People's Republics. Then, once the war actually started, Putin initially gave a speech about how Ukrainians are a bunch of Nazis, and so he's going there to remove the Nazis. And then a few days after that, he gave a rambly grandpa speech about restoring the glory of the Russian Empire. So we know it's the Russian Empire reclamation thing because he's written a bunch of delusional essays about that, and he's kind of been after that for a while. And he's been pushing Lukashenko for a few years on the whole uh, unification with Belarus thing. But Russia does have, several different reasons that they constantly will float around. Now, the most recent one in Putin's end of the year speech that he gave was he invaded Ukraine to liberate the world from the terrorism of Westernness. So the invading Ukraine and killing a bunch of people in Ukraine, and cutting off like the grain supply to a lot of starving third world nations that were relying on Ukrainian grain because Ukrainian grain is one of the main ones that goes to the World Food Program. Uh, him causing those people to starve is actually him liberating them, which I guess you can I guess you can reason that, if they're dead, they don't need to be liberated from anything anymore because they're not under whatever you're saying they're under the oppression of anymore. So I guess in that twisted logic, he is liberating them. But in reality, yeah, he wants to restore the Russian Empire. He wants, or not entirely necessarily the whole territorial angle, although he does want the European territorial portions of it back. But he wants desperately before he dies, because he is old, to like restore Russia to its imperial glory, basically. Xi Jinping kind of wants the same. He wants to take Taiwan. He's going to try. 2025 is the most likely year, although he might do it as early as next year. Now, Erdogan in Turkey kind of wants the same thing, although he does have a bit more like strategic desires with his stuff, because he's not just doing the Ottoman restoration thing because he wants to do the Ottoman restoration thing. He does want like a bunch of direct resource guarantees and like critical resource control stuff as well. But part of it is also harkening back to, imperial glory, as that is a common thing that happens when countries are, decaying in states of despotism, and the leaders realize that they can't really make the people's lives any better, or they realize that everyone's lives are about to get horrifically worse, and the only like angle they feel, in the case of when like they're just trying to preserve their own power, the only angle they feel they can push is the whole like national fervor angle. Putin is a bit different because he does actually believe in the whole Russian imperial glory stuff. Whereas in the case of a lot of others, they are in part like just trying to preserve their own existence. But so you have the Ukraine invasion. Now you have the Israel Gaza war that has, as of the last few nights, nothing has officially been like declared, but it has also now just turned into the Israel Lebanon war, because Israel didn't announce the start of the operation, but they did come out and announce that it's too late for to listen to Beirut about anything, or to let them try to like pull Hezbollah's leash back in. So in doing that, they've effectively said that they are just going to invade southern Lebanon. So now that's going to happen, which is now actually probably going to start cycling more things in. So that will almost inevitably actually start to pull more action from Syria, although Syria itself, as in the state, won't be able to do anything because they don't have a lot left after we Tomahawk striked them twice in 2018. And also, what little they have left in terms of like reasonable military power, which is just a few ground strike aircraft. Israel has repeatedly bombed those runways, like every few weeks, every time the runways get repaired and they're just like at the point of being usable again, Israel bombs the runways again. So Syria as a state is kind of out of it. I mean, they could do something with their ground force if they wanted to, but they kind of need that to hold back the rebels in the northern portions, because otherwise they'd be relying entirely on Russia, and Russia's not really all that game for it anymore because Russia has, other places it needs to sink its human capital into and dwindle its future in. And so if this, continues a uh, gradual spiral, as initially we all thought it was going to be a rapid blowout, but if it goes at a gradual spiraling pace, continuing in this progression, it very well still could likely end up bringing in participation from others, like Iran, and it already has brought in participation on the part of Yemen, as the Houthis down in Yemen have or had, a couple hundred cruise missiles. They fired like 50 at Israel so far, a few of which made it past everybody's AD systems and actually struck some stuff. They also have ballistic missiles, which are uh, not necessarily dumb missiles, but they're kind of dumb missiles. They go up and down in an arc. They can't like adjust their course. That's the primary difference between ballistic and cruise missiles. is ballistic missiles just go up in an arc and come down where they're told to. Cruise missiles, depending on the country they're from, depending on how sophisticated and modern they are, can actually like do zigzags. They can change course and like try to confuse AD systems, and they'll still hit the target point they've been told to, or they can be programmed to like you know seek out specific signatures when they get to a specific point. Whereas ballistic missiles can deliver like a big boom, but they are just hit these coordinates and nothing else, and their path is completely predictable. So Yemen has more ballistic missiles, really old Soviet ones they got from Iran, and some newer Iranian ones that they also got from Iran that are basically just re engineered versions of old Soviet ones. But they have more ballistic missiles than cruise missiles, and they just started using the ballistic missiles. Iran itself has not done anything yet. However, it might eventually. And then we have the inevitable Chinese invasion of Taiwan, which China was probably waiting at first until 2027, because that's when they would be the most ready and would be kind of the last demographic personnel size window they would have. But that's when like they would be done with like their additional amphibious landing fleets that they've been trying to build as fast as possible. That's when they would have 4 carriers ready. That's also when they would have like enough modern aircraft or modernized combat aircraft. However, we've been ahead of schedule pumping Taiwan full of stuff. They weren't supposed to get Abrams tanks until like 2026. However, Abrams tanks have already been spotted on their bases since the end of last year, actually. They've already been getting shipments of Patriot systems and SAM systems, and they are, I believe it's this year, they just started receiving HIMARS systems as well. And next year, I okay, I forget the yeah, it's the attack helicopters next year or early 2025, and the F-16s in 2026. At least that's the schedule as of the moment, which is it's probably going to happen faster, because why would you say the actual schedule, publicly? But even the claimed schedule is still faster than the original schedule was. And the idea of that, as has was my initial thought and has been confirmed to me by uh, quote unquote inside sources, is to try to force China's hand early, which is kind of working, because if they wait until the original 2027, Taiwan will have like a bit too much, and also other stuff elsewhere may have cleared up, which would mean a more direct US response should Taiwan not be able to handle things on their own. Because, as a general rule of using proxies to fight, if the proxy can take care of the problem, by all means, let the proxy take care of the problem. So we also now have Maduro, getting ready to invade Guyana at some point. That's one I was constantly telling you guys about was going to happen. I thought it wouldn't happen till later this decade, but everyone's going insane at like a more rapid pace than I initially thought. And then we have, the constant off and on threat of, supreme ultimate commander, self proclaimed, grand ruler of Libya, Colonel Haftar, who could, decide he wants to restart the civil war and conquer the western portion of Libya at any moment, and various other things like the inevitable attempt of Azerbaijan to invade Armenia, which would draw numerous other responses, which Turkey would then try to back them in. And so you have this whole setup of things that seem to be going on, along with all the different angles of like oil and gas development and things. So I and the after years of disinterest, the abrupt switch a few years back of the U.S. and some allied partners to into actually like arming Somalia, the government and actual military of Somalia, and like providing like full U.S./NATO training to, and in the case of a few thousand of them, like actual body armor and like optics and equipment to the Somali military, which has seen them now launch a offensive against Al-Shabaab and has basically reclaimed the country. Al-Shabaab and the other militants, their controlled territory has collapsed by over 90% since April of this year. So there was that abrupt switch, and I actually was initially looking at things like kind of, stamping this and stamping that, like not entirely isolated, but more like one angle at a time. But then I actually like started thinking, you know, okay, no one really like angles things completely isolated because that's kind of stupid. And uh the collective like US/NATO/ associated allies operative intelligence, whatever you want to call the apparatus, has already done things on like long term angles before, especially with Iraq related stuff. So that propensity has actually already been shown. So they're aware of, especially because it's kind of the math is blatantly obvious. They're aware of the coming resource and energy constraints that, for one, don't necessarily have to exist, or at least not to the degree that's that is thought they might. Like they can be greatly lessened, they can be greatly reduced, and things eased off a bit if certain things were to happen. So, actually, harkening back to one of the things that's like Russian accounts on Twitter used as an excuse for the invasion way back at the start, where they would throw in like all kinds of like actual reasons for what the bait was, like laboratories bioengineering mosquitoes to explicitly spread diseases targeting Russian DNA, because that's the thing. This isn't Jurassic Park, but you might have 5% of a point. Although even if that is correct, the whole like the U.S. / the West baited Russia into invading Ukraine. That's not a point in your favor though, because you saying that you fell for a trap isn't like isn't a bonus point to you. That doesn't like boost your look on things. But maybe you're right. Maybe it was bait. The bait wasn't mosquito biolabs. The bait was falsely projecting weakness for a decade plus. the Because as shown, the whole come together in response to things was a lot faster and a lot more a lot it went a bit not how Putin would have liked or expected. So I started thinking, okay, maybe it was bait. And because countries, one, never do things like entirely alone. Two, things are random, but not entirely random. Uh, Things like people, groups, national governments, and institutions do plan things out, or at least like general roadmaps of what they would prefer to attempt to accomplish or make happen. But as seen if you look throughout history at uh, any like nation or empire doing such things over the course of time, it doesn't go exactly as like how the plan would entail. Sometimes also it just doesn't at all. But long term, like outlooking stuff is actually a thing. And so, what am I adjusting? Why am I adjusting my volume? I don't know. Uh, okay, so I started like putting this thing together that over the course of the next 10 years, like starting from 2022, is when things are going to, gradually flip. Like I said, oil prices, for one, I told you over this decade is like when you will see the gradual inverting of oil prices. So if you look over the course of time, especially way back when oil prices are usually low and they've had spikes upward, and sometimes that long plateau in the early 2010s, and then they're low, sub 50 spike upward, sub 50 spike upward. But now it's going to transition into the upper bound prices are going to be the norm, and the downward stuff is going to be the rare like spike up occurrences, except they'll be spike down occurrences, obviously. So it's going to gradually invert because of constraints and various other things. Just it's not just oil, like oil and gas related stuff. There are quite a number of other energy and resource, and also some other like economic aspects of things that are going to be beginning their whole flip over the next like 10 years, and things transition into getting like potentially bad if nothing is done, you know, post 10 years from now is when things really start turning, especially like 2040 plus, as that particular time frame has been repeatedly brought up. So a much better arrangement than is current would be desired from the thinking points, uh, from the perspective, the thinking point of U.S., Europe slash NATO slash associated partners and allies and or beneficiaries. The primary other ones, being Japan, South Korea, post invasion Taiwan, and Australia and New Zealand. But a better situational arrangement like would probably be desired. And so there's stuff that that probably would need to be taken care of. There's some, undesirable actors who it would be preferable if they were no longer themselves and were a much more either friendly and or pliable version of themselves. Different ones of different power levels, but uh, ones especially that either in the case of Russia and Iran control large amounts of resources, or in the case of China, consume large amounts of resources. So because of the time frame I just mentioned, it would be probably best if all this could be rearranged and dealt with before, like the early 2030s hit. So, deal with things before 2032, use a range of between 2022 up to 2032. So, from this angle that I'm referring to, wow, why do you get so blurry? Let's get unblurry. How close do we have to get? That's good enough. Okay. So, from this perspective, you have some undesirable actors like Russia, for example. Although Russia, does or has, up to 2022, sold and exported its oil and gas, it's not a, it's not still not desirable because they could weaponize it and have shown propensity to do so. And so it would be, desirable from the angle of those potentially thinking this out to, change something about that. For one, this is that no, that's too bright. So hold on. Let's get decent enough color. Let's use this one. So, Russia bogs itself in Ukraine and gets a gradual cutoff and a fast or slow going, whichever one it is fine. Internal stagnation and eventual decrepitation, and inevitably in the process of things, because I don't think anyone would like directly like lay out like exactly how it would be preferable to go because you can't really do that. But one way or another, through bogging, overextension, and cutoff, Russia inevitably implodes, and a alternate version emerges. Uh, Preferably one that is either A, friendly, or B, pliable, like the 90s version, or C, both. Both would probably be the most preferable version. And yes, their oil and production, oil and gas production is falling both from initial intentional cutbacks because of customer absence and because of degradation of capability in the absence of the various major oil industries, the ones who had to rescue Russia's oil and gas production post USSR collapse, because everything basically Russia was at about 12 million barrels a day, and then that collapsed down to about six because six is what was coming from non permafrost, non Arctic, and regular conventional fields. So the Arctic slash permafrost stuff had to be rescued afterwards. And late 90s is when the major oil companies came in. Uh, B, BP, Shell, I think either Chevron or ConocoPhillips, Equinor, the Norwegian one especially. And that was then, brought back up. And other stuff has expanded and since continued. But in terms of, the damage done to Russia's oil production in this rearrangement, it can be brought back up. It's a case of, at least from those potentially like doing long term planning, this would be a case of looking at it as we did it before, we can do it again. It was only about like 5 or 6 years to like fully bring it not back up to 12, but to bring it back up high enough. So that can be taken care of post developments or post rearrangement. And once, that would happen, that would be oil and gas that is, completely market flowing and market attached and not under the influence of a single tyrannical despot who wants to weaponize it. And also, Russia's own domestic oil consumption, as would be the as well hopeful aim of a lot of these things in a lot of these countries' cases, is damaged. It has since collapsed from about 3.7 or 3.8 down to about 2.8 or 2.9 million barrels per day. And, post like full implosion over the 2020s, along with the continued aging of their society, it would probably, drop down closer to like two, and would still then, after everything, bounce up a bit from that, but it wouldn't go back up towards like four. And then you have like these various other things happening around here with some of the primary aims, now that the Israel stuff has happened. Uh, you know, that one, I don't really feel like that was particularly instigated but it is, it was something that could be jumped on. Like I would assume that the like collective intelligence apparatus would was hoping something like this would rile up, because the malactor here that wants to be dealt with is Iran, because Iran is capable of producing 4 million barrels per day. Granted, that plateau, as of current, given their current reserves, would reach its end around 2036 if, as of right this instant, it were to jump back up to 4 million barrels per day. However, not all of Iran's stuff has been explored. About half of their Caspian Sea waters are unexplored. Their stuff offshore on the sloping shelf is unexplored, and up into right here is unexplored. Plus, one of their internal basins, like right in here, that you can see is flat. So there is additional stuff that could be discovered to extend that, but it would be desirable if Iran, would actually like hold that plateau and was not the current regime that does things that make the associated countries put it under sanctions because they can't be seen domestically not putting it under some kind of punishment. And also, it would be better if Iran got itself fully involved in something that would then give a what's the uh, everyone that term everyone says in Latin to sound smart, casus belli, I think, uh, if it is Latin, to like fully strike Iran and aid the system in falling down. The domestic situation is actually already kind of coming undone in Iran. They actually have had uprisings in Balochistan, which is a separatist region, or is going to turn into one, and they've had internal anti-government forces or groups actually set fire to and burn down several like domestic fuel refineries. So it would be beneficial if Iran got itself fully into something that then gave like casus belli to do like full strikes against it and aid the internal rearrangement, which in the aftermath of such, just like in the aftermath of Iraq, now Iraq's oil demand levels, their domestic consumption before the uh, invasion in 2003 were close to 1 million barrels a day. They collapsed down to like 300,000. We'll assume at least half. We'll assume a 50% drop. So, post rearrangement, Iran's domestic oil consumption drops from 2 million barrels per day to less than one. So a restored 4 million barrel per day plateau would then be exporting three to the global market. The US and other coalition partners are about to, and this just came up in regular news as well, are about to start a series of unknown number of unknown scale of airstrikes in Yemen to take out the Houthis and their capabilities to predominantly protect oil shipments and to, kind of protect any potential damage to be done against the Persian Gulf and directly across the sea here to the potential emerging oil producer that will be Somalia, because Somalia does likely have a bit, probably enough to where, like, if everything were pursued as quickly and as readily as possible, they could probably get up to something like 1 million or 2 million barrels per day a couple decades from now. And other things, like in the midst of all this, it would probably be thought to be beneficial if somehow believing he could get away with it during the distraction of all this, Haftar in Libya decides he wants to go for it and invade the remaining third which would then suddenly, to his surprise, draw an actual response against him, which would see him taken out, which would then see Libya unified under a very pliable government, and thus there would be no actual holdups, no, territorial disputes over oil and gas exploration, and Libya could be restored up to like its full capable 2 million barrels per day, possibly even brought up to the 3 that it's actually capable of. Oops, no, sorry. Over here, and then, of course, you have, Venezuela, who could be holding a 3 million barrel per day plateau right now. Except they don't, because they collapsed and they can't restore themselves because their oil and gas engineers and personnel all fled the country as part of the 7 million people that have fled the country. So, it would be beneficial if Venezuela were to have a rearrangement of sorts, whether on the end of a barrage of cruise missiles or not. So, bait Venezuela kind of into trying to invade Guyana, something it's really not capable of. Venezuela gets crushed really easily by the US, probably Navy alone, because Venezuela isn't even Iraq in 2003 or 91. Venezuela is like an order of magnitude weaker than Iraq was. Venezuela then, has a resulting internal rearrangement of sorts, however that goes. Either friendly government or pliable government emerges, whichever one, or both. The intelligence apparatus, quote unquote, would probably hope for both. That would be like the best result. But, Venezuela is rearranged. Then, like Chevron is allowed completely in, restores the 3 million barrels per day. And then the Ornico Belt is like actually open to be fully pursued and developed. Venezuela is then brought up to, its fully capable 5 or 6 million barrel per day plateau. And then elsewhere, the remaining malactor on the, undesired list, uh, that, uh, unspoken planners would probably have is obviously China. For one, because China wants to assert itself as a global power, and for two, because China is a really big consumer. So China will try for Taiwan. That's inevitable within like just a couple of years. And uh, because it's a long distance naval invasion, it's already like really bad set from the get go. But Taiwan isn't isn't going to be like invading Normandy was for the Allies. It's going to be much, much worse. But even if Taiwan can't entirely take things on its own, in this case, the US would actually directly intervene, at least to an extent, enough to make sure the invasion fails. And when the invasion fails, China would have internal backlash from that, as people are no longer completely just like hiding from the CCP or complacent with the CCP. They're starting to hit their limits, especially with the degree of stuff that Beijing has like gone to the lengths of doing now, especially post Hong Kong and post COVID. So along with all this and other things, like their legitimately collapsing birth rate, not just exaggerated collapse, but actual like legitimate definition collapse. China has an internal buckling of sorts. Whether there's a rearrangement government wise or not is ultimately irrelevant. Just the economic internal blowback, because it would see them face a massive oil demand downturn of using a moderate but still generous estimate. Uh, Maybe they drop by, say, 4 million barrels a day, being generous to both the outside and to them at the same time. So that's kind of like a middle assessment. They dropped by 4 million barrels a day, maybe from 16 down to 12 million barrels per day. So, that would knock 4 million barrels per day of demand off the market, which would remove a huge amount of any possible strain existing. And also, since they've become one, Turkey probably, yeah, now on the list, honestly. Azerbaijan would be if they honestly had enough oil and gas to really matter. They don't. But yeah, Turkey, since they're inevitably going to try to help Azerbaijan with the whole Armenia invasion thing, is going to get drawn into something. And since everything has been happening earlier than I thought it would, even by like over 10 years, I'm gonna, now probably say this whole Turkey versus uh, former allies like other NATO members and the US is probably going to happen before I thought it would. Me initially thinking, you guys will remember me saying plenty of times that such a conflict I would assume would probably happen like late 2030s, early 2040s. But now, given the speed of things, it's probably going to happen a lot sooner than that. So, such a thing, if that one comes about, because that one I'm not entirely sure once Turkey like sees like the grand totality of everything going on, they would completely stick to that, but they still probably will. That would sort of knock Turkey in place, not knock them out, but it would knock them in place. And like their oil demand and stuff would basically kind of freeze, and their whole global military power uprising thing would basically come to a sort of dead stop. And so all of this would, for one, put the majority of global oil supply under more desirable more desirable rulership from the perspective angle of the collective US/NATO/ associated allies potential like intelligence planning apparatus or whatever terminology we're going to use here. Russia would rearrange itself and rebounds in like 5 years after intervention is allowed in terms of oil and gas infrastructure. Iran would rearrange itself and rebound to a 4 million barrel per day plateau, the length of which could be extended by further oil and gas exploration finally happening. So Russia probably wouldn't recover back up to a full 11 million barrels per day, but maybe up to like 9 or 10. So they recover up to that while their domestic consumption maybe goes back up to like the upper twos, but never really goes back up to four. And Turkey's gets frozen. Libya rearranges itself internally after Haftar tries something, or maybe after he just mysteriously dies, because uh, some forces in Libya, including some Russian forces stationed there, have been drone struck recently by an uh, it was quoted an unidentified entity carried out drone strikes. So, there's only two real uh, possibilities who are operating there, and it was either Turkey or it was us. Us, as in me speaking from the US. We're the only two that are like actually uh, you know, have like drones and crap in there. We have some Reapers, they have some Bayraktars. The only other one who has like any drone forces there is Russia. So maybe Russia drone struck itself, for all I know. Uh, wouldn't actually be that far out there. China, buckles back. Their demand drops by, we'll say, at least 4 million barrels per day. Iran, comes up to four, and their demand drops down to one. Libya, jumps up to either 2 or 3 million barrels per day. Venezuela, jumps up to three at least million barrels per day. And then, uh, amidst all of this, the inverted oil prices, especially the higher portions, caused by all of the war and conflict going on, are used are used rapidly to spur and further, as quickly as possible exploration and development in remaining areas that are either untouched or still have stuff that hasn't been fully like gone into. So that gets used not just for oil but also for gas. Uh, oh yeah, Iraq, especially since Iraq is nowhere near their actual capability. Neither is Kazakhstan. Mexico finally is getting around to things. So the higher prices resulting from such are used to actually uh, you know, fully spur things to what they could be, as opposed to what they would otherwise be, which would be partially inadequate. Plenty of gas from Indonesia and Malaysia resulting, and especially from Australia. Australia just brought on a bunch of new fields, random 3 second tangent. Australia just jumped from like 17 or 18 billion cubic feet per day. As of 2 months ago, they just jumped up to 26 billion cubic feet per day of natural gas production. And stuff gets rapidly expanded in the offshore gas of Mozambique as well. Who else? Where else would it be pouring into the rapid expansion stuff? The industry would use it to sort of like get Egypt to actually get up off of, its lazy butt and stop leisurely exploring and actually like really explore and do like some full stuff in Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, and Senegal, along with actually doing the other half of offshore Nigeria that Nigeria has never gotten around to, and the internal stuff in Nigeria, as well as post rearrangement Venezuela. Like I said, that high war price money off and on over the 2020s slash like 2030, 2031, and 2032 would also, go into like fully bringing the Orinoco Belt online. And so that's an additional like angle to everything, along with like so this would basically, if it went as desired, would see us globally, the world, reach, the 2030s or, 2032 with a decently better supply of oil and natural gas than we would otherwise have, particularly uh, boosted by the fact that uh, demand collapses and demand deficits will have been induced in specific countries. The most influential demand collapse slash deficit being from China, and then from Iran and Russia as well. Whereas Libya doesn't really consume anything. Turkey would kind of just freeze in place. Yemen consumes next to zero, and Venezuela post rearrangement would probably freeze in place like around 300 to 400,000 barrels per day. And even, Brazil isn't a malactor, but even as Brazil continues growing in economic activity and population, Brazil's oil consumption has remained kind of stagnant at like 2.5 million barrels per day for the last decade. So they're not really a concern. And Saudi Arabia is like deconcerning itself since it's switching its power generation over to natural gas. So if all of this went as like desired from this particular perspective, then it would end with us in a better global supply demand situation from both angles, both oil and gas, and also uh, since most of said planning, if that's what we're going to phrase this as, would probably be from the US's end. Although I'm rather certain uh, key, long-term best buddies are probably like completely like in with things. Whereas like, others might be like vaguely aware of stuff, but like Britain and France are definitely in. This would also provide secondary results, which people usually consider as like the primary results, but these would be secondary results. They would also be considered, bonuses. And that is, in terms of like weapons manufacturing, for one, there's really the US, there's Europe, and then there's Russia and China. Half of which half of what China has and sells is just repurposed stuff from Russia anyways. Same with Iran, although Iran has developed some domestic stuff, but it's really not the best. And there is a rising Turkey and India. Turkey and India have actually developed really good stuff. Plus, as well, Japan and South Korea. So this has already, especially because of how ineffective their systems are, as has been demonstrated in Ukraine, this has already kind of started to shove Russia out of the weapons market globally. So there is that angle already progressing. Uh, Post rearrangement, post invasion, China will be, effectively kind of pushed out of that. And post rearrangement, so will Iran, especially since a lot of Iran doing stuff kind of relies on getting supplies from Russia, anyways. So that then breaks a lot of stuff down and kind of reconsolidates the like global weapons industry market to suppliers that are either, members or, desired friends like Japan and South Korea, or, just in this case, I don't know what said planning group would consider India. I would guess permitted beneficiary, because India's like India's gray. India's not really like India's not really like for or against. So India would benefit from like a displaced market share as well. But we'll just label them as a like permitted beneficiary. And the same thing actually with a lot of other things like energy and resource infrastructure, like power equipment, generating equipment, drilling equipment, vessels, and everything. There's uh, there's the U.S. and Canada. There's Europe, and then there's Russia and China. And once you get into like ship construction and stuff, then there's also like South Korea and Japan. So Russia is already seeing the removal of itself as a result of the Ukraine invasion. Post invasion, post rearrangement, China will effectively, at least for a time, be removed. And thus, that kind of then would leave everybody again dependent on North American makers, or European makers, or Japanese and South Korean. And also, since India is making their own stuff in that regard now, also India would be there again as a permitted beneficiary of everything. So that's the way I kind of that's the way I, sort of playing around, kind of worked everything out of like if I was doing some kind of long long term like big picture play aspects of everything that's been going on. That's this is like how I would potentially imagine it is uh basically it seems like, especially since everybody is acting at once, at least at once, as in, within a very few short years, uh, bait everybody to act at once. Everybody you want to like deal with in some way, at least. Uh, bait everybody into acting at once, and then proceed from there with how the situation develops. But primarily because the 10 years of the 2020s slash from 2022 to 2032 is like a bit of a constricted, not entirely self-imposed, but not entirely like actual limits or resources imposed either. But it's a dual-sided coin of an imposed like time window restriction by which it would be really desirable if everything that you want to rearrange had been rearranged. So, that would be like the impetus for attempting to bait everybody at once, which for its part, kind of seems to be working. You know, Russia went first. Azerbaijan started their bit up, which will eventually involve Turkey. But then this stuff all started, which now has gotten to the point that Yemen is directly involved, and a like air campaign is about to be carried out. Iran will likely, and in the case of, or from the perspective of those like planning this, hopefully get involved, because then that would be casus belli for actually striking. Uh, Now that Iran is growing closer to getting directly involved, to like making direct missile strikes against Israel, now that Israel is has literally effectively announced that they are about to invade southern Lebanon, because it's not really going to self-contain from there. And then China and Taiwan is already inevitable. That was already going to happen anyways. But we are kind of trying to force China's hand early, which is at least seeming to be working for the time being. And then Venezuela went for Guyana, like I said, way more eagerly and way sooner than I would have thought. The only other thing, like elsewise, would be seeing if Haftar, decides he wants to actually like try for the other remaining third of Libya, which he kind of did the Russia 2021 move already, where he lined his forces up like he was about to attack twice over the course of this year. Like he gathered everything up, moved to the areas, but then stopped and pulled back. So I think that is actually already happening, and he's doing these repeated off and on buildups to try to like lull the western portion of Libya into thinking that he's just muscle flexing each time. So he might actually be like reasonably close to attempting that. And I should drink some water and probably look at my chat since I haven't done that for like an hour. Over an hour, actually. I think Azeris will invade. They will invade Armenia. They already Aliyev already straight up said he's going to. Like in an actual public speech, I remember like showing some of the bookmarked tweets I had of the clips from it. After like saying, we reclaimed our lands, and next we will reclaim the rest of our lands. And he pointed out Armenia and said that that's Western Azerbaijan, and belongs to Azerbaijan, and Azerbaijan is going to reclaim it. So he already straight up said they are going to invade Armenia. Uh, I don't know if like they'll do it all at once. They kind of, along with Erdogan commenting on it, kind of hinted at the fact that they might just invade Sunik and Vayot's provinces first, and see, like, see to what point they can manage that and get away with it. But there, is also, because everyone has been acting more boldly than I would expect, because I do have this bad habit of projecting like my, uh, rationality and preference for like slightly not even logical thinking, but just thinking in general. Conducting a thought process before committing actions. I do have a bad habit of projecting that portion of myself onto other people and assuming they do the same, and then I see that most people like just that. So NPCs are real is basically kind of the message from that. So maybe they will just straight up go for the whole thing all at once. If they do, they will not be able to pull it off on their own. Turkey will have to either help them or come to their aid slash rescue when somebody else uh, attempts to come to Armenia's rescue, and then we will see, a whole spiral issue from that. But yeah, the uh, Gaza has been ongoing for 2 months. Excuse me, Zoom, please. And now Israel gave Beirut, like, I don't know, a couple days ago, they said, you have 48 hours to rein in Hezbollah or else we're going to invade. And now, it's been a few days, so they made like a public announcement either yesterday or today that it's too late now. Uh, and like I don't know, they said, I forgot what words they used, but they said like the trigger has been pulled or something like that, which is not really coded language, but some form of coded language. It's not exactly all that coded for saying they're going to invade Lebanon. Although uh, by their attempts to make themselves like seem a bit more gracious than they actually are, they've insisted they're only going to invade like the southern third of Lebanon. So only a third of the country. But let's see it in Gaza, it's up to now like over 20,000 dead civilians, 10,000 missing, missing under the rubble, which missing under the rubble would it just means dead. Okay, all it means is that they're dead, but they haven't found a body or will probably never find that person's body. So in reality, it's about 30,000 dead, along with uh, yeah, it's in excess of 5,000 Hamas members killed, the majority of which are residents of Gaza, although, like I said, 10, maybe 15% of Hamas is volunteers from elsewhere, like Egypt and Syria, but most are actually from Gaza. So you can go ahead and round for the 5,000 and put that on to make it 35. And then I think 2,000 plus Gazans have evacuated to other countries effectively permanently because one or more members of any particular family had dual citizenship. And obviously, when all this started, as soon as the opportunities were given, they fled to whatever other country they have citizenship in and took any allowed family members with them. And a couple other thousand have been flown to Tunisia, Egypt, the UAE, Kuwait, various places as hospital refugees, and they're not exactly going to be, Israel's not exactly going to let them back in. Not that they kind of want to go back into a zone that's being indiscriminately bombed day and night. So it's close to 40,000, 30,000 dead or 35,000 dead and, 5,000 gone physically, but still alive elsewhere. So, you know, Netanyahu has succeeded in getting rid of 2% of Gaza's population. Probably not as high as he would have set his goals, but now he has other issues like his intended invasion of Lebanon, which is then, like I said, going to ramp things up. And depending on how that goes, might spill over with some like Golan stuff in Syria, and eventually, especially from those who have potentially been like having a similar like plan or outlook to what I just laid out, uh, from their perspective, hopefully, inevitably getting Iran to actually act, and like starts firing its cruise and ballistic missiles, which would then give casus belli for U.S. and allies' air power response from the region to begin striking Iran. And unlike Iran actually fears, there would be no invasion of Iran. For one, because it's a giant mountain range, and that would be a huge pain and would actually see like the kind of casualties that the U.S. expected to see in Iraq. Like, for example, when we invaded in 2003, and enemies always underperformed. Russia, especially, is proof of this now, and they're not even fighting us. Uh, our enemies have always underperformed. We have always given our enemies the benefit of the doubt in our planning of things post Vietnam. In the late 70s slash early 80s, we internally quietly kind of had a military revamp and became the U.S. modernized like military crushing force that you are aware of today, that is commonly referred to. We constantly overestimate our enemies, give them the benefit of the doubt, and now, as a result of that, have constantly found the opposite to be true. Like when we invaded Iraq in 2003, we expected to lose between 10 to 20,000 guys. We expected to lose, I think they said 300 tanks and or armored vehicles, even though, the seven Abrams tanks that got lost in the 91 war were only lost because of friendly fire. Uh, we, still put the expectation out there that we would lose 300, uh, you know, armored vehicles and tanks. And we expected, I think our expectation was to get like potentially 60 to 80 aircraft shot down. And we ended up with like next to nothing. I remember specifically the actual like U.S. infantry casualty count was not between 10,000 and 20,000. It ended up being not even 200. It was, I think the exact number was 193. So we have in our in the U.S. that you know now, uh, that has existed since the 80s or since the first Gulf War, when it was like fully actualized and revealed. We constantly overestimate our enemies on purpose, and that was kind of, really demonstrated with Russia severely underperforming, even beyond the extent of those who knew that Russia would underperform and that Russia was not what it pretended to be. Even like beyond their expectations, Russia has you know underperformed in quotation marks and underlined, to say the very least. So we do have the same overestimated expectations for China, partly because because one, that makes us plan things better. Secondly, two, because it helps us also be ready for it if it does happen that way. So in that like expectation, I think us versus them, not regarding Taiwan or Japanese and South Korean engagements with them, but specifically U.S. air and naval power against China. Our average expectation has been a 2.5 to 1 or 3 to 1 ship loss exchange rate. and a between widely varying between 2-1 and 3-1 aircraft engagement loss exchange rate. So in reality, as has been repeatedly shown, it would probably end up being something much more lopsided. Uh, and with Iran, uh, we would probably actually, because of A, the terrain, B, the urbanization, and C, the actual fervor of the people for the country, not the government, but the people of Iran, at least the Iranians, not the Azeris who live up there, or the people in Balochistan down there, who are now actually bombing police stations and setting infrastructure on fire in Balochistan over the last few weeks, and have actually engaged Iranian security forces in firefights. So the whole separatism thing, the separatist militancy, has actually started for real in Balochistan now. Uh, but the Iranians of Iran do actually have like patriotic fervor for their country. They just drastically want it under a different government. But if it were invaded, they would defend Iran. Uh, Unlike Iraq, when Iraq was defended, the Iraqis did not really defend Iraq. Sorry, when Iraq was invaded, I mean, the Iraqis did not really defend Iraq. They definitely fought harder during the invasion than they did when in the first Gulf War when we were just pushing them out of Kuwait. When they were the invaders being repelled, they obviously fought way less hard and surrendered way more instantly than they did when they were defending Iraq. But even when the Iraqis were defending Iraq, they still buckled really fast. But Iran would be really different. I think like our expectation from invading Iran would be that we would suffer like something near 100,000 casualties. It would probably end up being lower, but it would still be really high compared to Iraq and Afghanistan and Gulf One. It would probably be something like the losses we expected from the 2003 Iraq invasion, minus the aircraft losses, because Iran's air force is uh, yeah, no. It has a bunch of ancient F4 Phantoms, and it has some F-14 Tomcats. Uh, we're we know they have 120, like physically, that are like they move around and sometimes they fly. We don't know how many of those 120 are like could honestly fight, because no one's even manufactured the parts for those to like repair and do maintenance upkeep on them, let alone the fact that Iran is under sanctions and everything. Those things, they haven't even been getting manufactured for decades, so that there are no like spare parts for them to get. So their fleet has shrunk from like 300 down to 120 over most of that shrinking has happened over like the last 15 years, because they've run out of like places that still had old F-14 and F4 spare parts that they could smuggle in through the sanctions from, and have only now been able to maintain their aircraft via maintenance cannibalism. So the aircraft portion would not be an issue. Just like Yemen has, I don't know if you guys saw that, but Yemen has threatened uh, that they're going to deal a huge blow to the U.S. and allied air forces if they try to conduct airstrikes on Yemen, because they were bragging like Yemen is not Hamas. Yemen has an air force, and they showed their F-5s, the ancient like 1950s aircraft that is used for basic jet pilot training in countries with more modern arsenals, and their MiG 21s. I don't know if you remember the ancient old MiG 21s. That's the needle nose thing. Yeah, this. That's also some 50 stuff right there. So that's the Yemenis Air Force. They're ready for us. They're gonna deal a huge blow. They're gonna take down hundreds of F-18s and F-35s. And what else? French Rafales, Rafales too. They're gonna be falling from the sky left and right. Uh, I will wait till graduate. Uh, kind of for one, uh, for one because Gaza isn't actually going as well as they would have liked it to go. So they want to try something else and hope that goes better. But also, Hezbollah is a bigger threat. Hezbollah, as opposed to just a bunch of unguided rockets, uh, Hezbollah Hezbollah does have a bunch of unguided rockets, but they have, 5 times more than Hamas did at the start, and Hamas has already used about like two-thirds of theirs. Whereas Hezbollah has like another 145,000, and also Hezbollah has actual ballistic missiles that they've gotten from Iran through Syria and through parts of northern Iraq before that. Uncertain counts, we think around like 2,000, maybe 2,500 on the upper end. So, those could actually like do things as opposed to the rockets, which haven't like done the kind of damage that they were envisioned to. But Hezbollah also has not ancient anti-tank munitions, but not like fully modern ones either. They have whatever you would call the middle ground of stuff. They have stuff that is targeted and is tracked, but it's most of it isn't like the more complex and easy fire and forget stuff. A lot of it does require actual like on point tracking, and they've also started causing more problems than, despite the fact that they haven't been doing as much stuff as Israel initially thought they were. They have been doing like stuff that's starting to cause undesirable economic damage. Like they have really been keen on taking out cell towers and power transmission lines and transformer stations, which has started causing problems up in the north. And they recently said that if Israel does actually fully go into southern Gaza, like they claim they're going to, then they will actually conduct like a full, like, multi-thousand rocket barrage plus probably several dozen ballistic missiles as well on Haifa, which is a densely populated city, which would then, kind of probably cause actual damage and probably kill a bunch of people. So Israel wants to, do something about that, and especially now with how long this has gone on, the fact that Gaza isn't going the way they would hope it was going, and also and also hold on, the speaking part of my brain is frying itself a bit. All right, hold on, I'm restarting my brain. My age is starting to show. I really am 30. Yeah, and Netanyahu especially is kind of dealing with like major discontent. I don't know if you guys remember the like hundreds of thousands of people protesting against him for various things over the last couple of years, but he's already not well liked, and everyone has been like responding to polls by saying, they really think he should be gone, even despite the fact that the war is ongoing. So he probably, wants to do something that and hope it goes well, pull off some kind of like bigger win that would, you know, change people's opinions of him because he's proven to be a bit narcissistic. And in terms of like uh, the U.S. reining that in and like not letting him do it, again, because of the entire hour we just spent talking about all of this and the potential like baiting and endgame goals of everything, uh, we're not really going to stop any of that because behind the scenes, we actually are probably hoping Iran actually does like act directly, because then that would give the excuse to start striking them. And again, like I said, there wouldn't be an actual invasion, primarily just airstrike, at least everywhere, everything we knew that they have in terms of capability. So, uh, you know, first, like first, at least, from my angle, send the B2s in, and send them at their actual like 40 or 50,000 feet. Send the B2s in and preemptively stealth bomb their air defenses and their ancient, decrepit air force, so that there's nothing to engage like regular strike aircraft when those get sent in, and then send in regular strike aircraft to bomb out everything else, like obviously their ground forces, but before those, specifically anywhere we know that their launch sites are for their cruise missiles and or ballistic missiles, and their storage sites for their cruise and ballistic missiles, and the manufacturing points for said cruise and ballistic missiles, and wherever the other factory for their Shahed suicide drones is. Israel took out one of them last year, partly to help Ukraine, so that Iran would only have the one factory running for them, and partly also just because Israel would jump at the chance to strike Iran anyways, and also partly, almost certainly on our request, to test the F-35 stealth against Iran's air defenses, since those are primarily Russian air defenses. So, we wanted to see, will it get seen, and or if it gets seen, can it actually be targeted? And the answer was, of course, no, it can't. Whether to both or whether to just the second one, unknown, but effectively irrelevant. Because even if it can be seen, it doesn't matter if you can't target it. So Israel has done several penetration runs into just the western area of Iran, because the F-35 doesn't have an extremely long combat range, although Israel does have some aerial refueling, but that would require them refueling over either Syria, Iraq, or Jordan, and Jordan would be the only option who would actually agree to that. Not that they honestly would have a choice in the matter, but uh, so so those so yeah, first, stealth takeouts, the AD systems, the ancient air force, then the cruise missile and ballistic sites and the storage sites and the factories for like the Shahed missiles and stuff, and then the ground force equipment, and then from there the situation internally will kind of rearrange itself, because it has already tipped on and off of doing that anyways. And actually, in the midst of that, actually now looking at it, in the midst of that, Azerbaijan might defer away from Armenia temporarily and try to jump in on that and do a whole, or if they got Turkey's help to do it, because they definitely wouldn't do it themselves, attempt a, liberation of the Azeri people in the northwestern portion of Iran, which not no one is like, not again. nothing is like entirely like red or blue or black or white, one side or the other. There is the people up here in northwestern Iran are Azeri, and they are pretty suppressed, along with various other groups. The Baha'i people, Iran has been arresting en masse recently for whatever reason. Uh, the Balochs in Balochistan have now, like I said, started actually blowing crap up down there. Police stations, refineries, having actual engagements with security forces over the last number of weeks. So that stuff would kind of begin tearing into things. Also, there might be a bit of a Kurdish unity slash independence movements that might spring up as well. And in the midst of that, all the other stuff like the Iranians' disgrievances with their government themselves would also then spiral in, and we kind of let that play itself out and at least influence it in what way we could in a direction we desired to get a hopefully desirable outcome. Like I said, in the case of each red colored country, to end up with either a friendly government or a pliable government, a malleable government, or both. Both from the perspective of intelligence apparatus planning would be the preferred result, but it's not a likely result. So either friendly or pliable, either one would be fine. And like I said, Haftar has already been kind of feinting stuff on the border with the western third of Libya. So it's kind of looking like he's trying to lull them into a repeated pattern and is eventually going to try to just invade the entire remaining portion because even if it weren't for us trying to like bait him into that with the whole projected non-response weakness stuff, he would inevitably do that anyways because he can't resist. They never can, really. And by all means, in the midst of everything, there will be other stuff going on, but it's not on like the list of things that I think are probably on the direct directly influenced planning board. Like Ethiopia is going to be breaking apart as it's already in the process of. With its repeated response to dissident regions, responding to them by cutting them off from food and starving millions of people to death. That never ends well. So Ethiopia is going to be spiraling, but we don't really consider them critical in terms of like energy and resource supply in any way, even geopolitically, because we have Djibouti and we have Somalia, and the forces we have there could deal with Ethiopia pretty easily if Ethiopia ever did anything. Like their vague hints by their current president that they might invade Eritrea to like claim Red Sea territory, because I doubt they're stupid enough to invade Djibouti because we're there, the French are there, the British are there. I think the Turks are even there now as well, and China is also there, and I think India wants to have a naval station there soon. So I don't think Ethiopia will be stupid enough to actually try their whole naval ports thing with Djibouti. They would probably do it with Eritrea because Eritrea is like the weakest of their three options. But even if they did so, we would probably and we as in the US and also most likely other associated allies as well probably would not really do anything, partly because it's not on like the big concerns list, just like Sudan isn't. Even though there is oil in Sudan and some other things, it's not really that huge of a priority aspect. We have all the other critical priorities that we have, but also because Ethiopia is going to be falling apart anyways. So we're kind of just going to let them, take whatever end of life course they want. And also, the various conflicts in the Congo will continue uh, from maybe like when they feel attention is like fully away from them. Rwanda and Uganda might like actually officially announce their whole invasion of this portion of the Congo, which they already kind of have invaded and are occupying this region here because it's full of tantalum mines. Tantalum is a critical resource necessary for the existence of computers and electronics, but we don't honestly consider that on the concern list because, for one, we can get it elsewhere just much more expensively than from the Congo. But also, Uganda and Rwanda, uh, even if they invade to take control of the tantalum, they're still selling it because they want to take control of it, not for like some big geopolitical gambits. They just want to take control of it to get the money from it, which they are getting because they're now the ones selling it. So we kind of, from the planning and concern aspect, don't necessarily like have a problem with it as long as the person in control is still selling things, which the junta in Myanmar, who is losing the civil war and is getting pushed back one area after another, two states now. They've effectively been pushed out of by the rebel forces, and another one they've been pushed out of half of, and effectively not entirely pushed out of, but they've lost most of the majority of their presence in the southern arm here. And fighting has actually erupted in a city right around here, which was, is A, really close to the capital, and B, was thought to be really well under the Myanmar government's control. So the whole military dictatorship is kind of coming down there. But the Myanmar government thought most likely that China would inevitably rescue them from the rebels because, they're China's primary supplier of tin ore and also rare earth metals because uh, rare earth deposits don't literally just all contain every rare earth metal. The ones in China contain specific ones. The ones in Myanmar contain specific ones. Some have some, and some have others that the others don't. And uh, the Myanmar government found out after the rebels have seized most of the like border crossing regions that's and a lot of the mining regions. The Myanmar government has discovered that China actually isn't going to come rescue them from the rebels because China only cares if they're still getting the resource. And the rebels didn't stop the flow of tin and rare earth metals to China. They're just the ones that are actually like, sending it over now. So Beijing doesn't actually care who's doing the selling as long as they get to buy it. And the rebels are perfectly willing to keep selling it to them. So Beijing's not going to intervene on the part of Myanmar's military dictatorship. So Myanmar's military dictatorship is on its way downward. And I don't know, just because it's a common theme over history, somewhere in the midst of all this, India and Pakistan, maybe they'll go at it again because they find a reason eventually. But that should be everything. This ended up being 45 minutes longer than I initially intended it to. So I'm going to get off here and go eat something, and then get back to editing videos and Google Docs. So for anybody who doesn't know about the Google Docs, go to go to any of like the latest videos. This one has all seven because it's the absolute latest video. But go down to the description, and you'll see links to different Google Docs where I have all kinds of stuff you guys might want to see, might not, but stuff, that would otherwise be scattered about that you'd have to go looking up for one by one. And sometimes, especially with the electricity generation graphs, a lot of them only update like every few years. Whereas even though it's a crappy Excel made version, I have actual like up to date versions for each country. But there's a lot of other stuff like demographic overlay charts, oil and gas exploration maps, and everything. So I am constantly, even if I'm not putting up videos, I am working to try to make sure there is an excuse for why I'm being paid. I do put together like all kinds of stuff, and I'm constantly updating that. But other than that, that should be it for this one. So uh, still, no, I'm not in Alaska. I have not been in Alaska for 4 years now. I lived in Fairbanks. Fairbanks is still my home. It's actually still listed as my address. I'm not changing that. Uh, and honestly, I will fly back up in 2027 if I am not making enough to move back up there yet. I'll still spend the money if I can cough it up to fly back up there just to get my ID renewed. I'm not getting a South Carolina ID. But I lived up here in Fairbanks, just around near the college here in the subsection of the town literally called College, and in up until 2019, because I got 2020 to by 2020, the year 2020, 2020 to me, and unlike other people, I didn't get to recover from that. So I've been stranded down here at my parents' place in South Carolina, which is in the South, which is a boiling hot, humid, miserable, crash covered, uneducated abyss. And like I, as my exercise, I literally go around walking every day around the streets, picking up all the trash on the side of the road down here because unlike back up home, everybody down here just like throws their garbage on sidewalks and into the woods and on the side of the road. And yes, most of it is usually beer bottles and beer cans, and occasionally like a McDonald's Happy Meal bag or something. But no, I am not in Alaska. I would love to be, but I will need to meet a minimum income threshold to be able to pull that off around like 650 or 700 a month. And yeah, from you guys that are on Patreon, I'm up to like $80 a month. YouTube, like the ad revenue from ads like no payments until spring or whatever that is really sporadic. Like it oscillates so so wildly from from like 70 to as high as 400 1 month. One time a couple of years ago, I actually got like as high as 600 for just that 1 month. And then there's also the random like PayPal donations, but those are also like really sporadic, so I can't exactly like average those out. But oh yeah, I need to update the Patreon map for those that are on Patreon. Where's the Patreon map? That's okay. It should be this one. Yeah, because someone left and then two other people joined. Uh, I have made up the losses because I did lose a bunch of people from Patreon once the Israel stuff started. That saw a major exodus of Patreon contributors, but I have since recovered from that. But I need to change some of the names around. The tiers on Patreon are labeled after oil exporting countries and what degree of exporter they are. Like mild exporters is stuff like Gabon. Sizable exporters is stuff like Angola, and then Persian Gulf exporters is, Persian Gulf countries. Technically, also Russia would go under there. And if for some reason I actually get to the point that like I have enough people that that map fills up, I have another map that I prepped, which is this one to then start also including natural gas exporters as well. And in the non-existent, unlikely scenario that even that fills up, I will figure something out. But yeah, I based it kind of on where people are from to an extent, though not really. Wolfgang is from Brazil, so he got Brazil, and he is in the sizable exporter margin. John is from Canada, so he got Canada, and he is on the Canada size tier. Josh, I don't know why I gave him Kazakhstan, but I gave him Kazakhstan just because. No, he's not from Kazakhstan. He's from South Carolina. Uh, but I don't know. I just gave him Kazakhstan because I like Kazakhstan, and Josh is my best friend. It's actually one of my only friends. That list is very small now too, and one of the only people I am reasonably convinced is also a like actual human. Because, like I said, especially it became visible like since the Ukraine war started, but really after the Israel Palestine stuff started. I really rapidly have discovered that I am very alone in my like my what I thought was basic human view that evil is evil. And people who do evil things are evil. Groups of people are not evil. Ethnicities or religions of people or nationalities of people are not evil. People who do evil things are evil. However, I've discovered that is not the view held by the majority of humanity. The majority of humanity devise on any given thing, they will devise immediately two armed camps and then join one of them with the desire of exterminating the other group. So I have rapidly discovered, even amongst people I know and am close to, that they are also doing that. So I'm very alone. I do know from lifelong experience and from frequent conversations about this with Josh, and from being around Josh a lot. Josh is an actual human. He is a fellow human. And also Elias and his wife, who unfortunately live in New York City. I do know they are also actual humans. As for the majority of other people, though, I have been really disconvinced. So someone in chat on stream a while back said that they'd seen studies that thought that indicated that the ratio of what I just defined as like being human versus being a campist is like 80 to 20. Whereas I'm more convinced it's like 99.9 to 0.1. Uh, you know, Maybe I'm assuming that like I'm the defective one for uh, you know, having that view that like, you know, evil is evil and people who do evil things are evil, as opposed to camp picking and extermination wishing, which actually seems to be the majority view. So that has been a that has been a discovery I have made, especially over the last 2 years, with the big hammer down portion coming once the Israel and Palestine stuff started over the last 2 months. But that was an off tangent that came from me labeling Josh as Kazakhstan on the Patreon map. That will. Oh yeah, I forgot. This was the actual one. So yeah, don't save that. I need to use that map in the future. That will then actually be the end of this. Was there anything else? Uh, my hate for the South is never ending. Of course it is. I had to not all of my childhood. Thankfully, my childhood was spent on Cape Cod up in Massachusetts, so I got to experience actual seasons throughout the year. Up until age 12 was when we moved to South Carolina, so I had to endure middle and high school years in the burning netherworld that is the southern U.S. And then I ran up for I ran up for or sorry, not ran up for. I ran away to Alaska the moment I was done with high school and became an adult. And Alaska was like so perfect because A, it's cold. B, it actually does have seasons though. Even in Fairbanks, we have a summer, and we have 2 to 3 months of summer, and then we have 2 weeks of fall and 2 weeks of spring, and then the other 8 months is winter and eternal Arctic darkness. I love it, and also the people up there, the people around me, like no one ever mentioned anything. Nothing about Obama, nothing about Trump, nothing about anything that was ever like happening. No one, even at the university, which is should defy rationality. No one no one spoke about anything. No one started protests or holding signs. No one went on any rants or got up on any podiums. Like it was an actual like Earth version of paradise to me. Tribal people with nukes. Yes, although thankfully, thankfully we somehow by the grace of God up to this point, people that are intelligent enough, maybe not necessarily human enough, but intelligent enough to know not to actually use the nukes. Uh, now that like we have nukes and not Hiroshima nukes, uh, have also been like intelligent enough to get their way into positions of like authority and control, not the elected ones, but the heads of departments and Pentagon-esque type stuff, the positions that don't really change every 4 years. They've been smart enough to get themselves into such positions and keep them, and keep the handsy people who might want to use the nukes away from the nukes, with like some exceptions, obviously being North Korea and Kim Jong Un. But I don't know, for some reason, what was the nickname for him? Rocket Man. For some reason, Rocket Man hasn't actually like launched a rocket yet. But yeah, that will be it.